Good morning. Are you all listening? Dr. Malay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sorry for delay. There are some technical problem. There is no net here in our college. I'm sorry. Anyway, that's good. You all are fine, I hope.
Yes, sir.
That's good. So now I'm talking to you about the wound and healing. In surgery, when you talk about surgery, there is always a wound. There are all a very close relation between surgery and wound. Okay, that's why you must know about the wound and its healing, and that's very important part of your surgery to know about wound. Okay, uh, what is wound after all is a destruction of tissue. In surgery, apart from non-operating cases, there is always destruction of surgery. That's why it's a destruction of tissue is a wound, and restore the integrity of the injured tissue is a healing. So, whatever or whenever there is a wound, it has to heal. So, there is a destruction and loss of tissue, and that should be replaced by the same type of tissue uh, in that wound that's healing. If in a wound, a different type of tissue comes and heals, it is not possible. And if at all it is happens, that's wrong, and that makes a lot of problem in surgery. That's why when the destruction tissue that should be replaced by the same type of tissue or cells, then it's known as a proper wound healing. That's why wound and healing they go together. Okay, so there might be a lot of types of wounds. Those are very clean wounds. There are not tidy wounds like in surgery, inside, clean wound, healthy wound. There is no loss of tissue. They are tidy and no any bacteria. But untidy one is a crust, avulsed, contaminated, the road traffic accidents or fall or stab, or deep hydrolytic tissue because of the pressure or because of the necrosis, the the wound they get devitalized tissue. There's a big gap, or often there is a big loss of tissue, chunk of tissue they goes off. So this is very important to understand tidy wound, untidy wound. When you say tidy wound, there's not much of chance of getting infected, and there might be good healing. When you say untidy wound, the chances of infection is very high, and once there is infection is very high, the chances of devitalized or loss of tissue is very high. So they might have a very bad scar tissue, or they need something extra to heal up the wound. That's a basic difference between tidy and untidy wound. Okay. So when we talk of the healing of a wound, there are three phases, very important phases. Uh, so these phases, the inflammatory, proliferative, and remodeling phases, they starts the moment there is an wound. You see, only the process are slow, but once there is any wound, whether we make in surgery or there is a trauma or somebody else stab injury, whatever it is, the process of healing starts there and then. Apart from that, on the same simultaneously, there is a destruction also goes on. Okay, so good thing that is healing as well as bad thing that is non-healing, they go together during the initial stage of the wound healing. Okay, so once there is we give an incident, there is a wound now. There is a gap in the superficial tissue or deep tissue, but at the same time, the process of phases of the wound healing goes on. It starts from the zero time also. Okay, that's it. We have to understand these things. It's inflammatory, proliferative, and remodeling. IPR is that word you have to keep in mind when they talk of phases of wound healing. In the inflammatory phases, it starts within 2 days, but it starts from the time of injury to 2 to 5 days. Okay, immediately to 5 days. As I told you, once there is injury, the inflammatory process starts. So what happens in the inflammatory process? There is hemostasis, means there is a vasoconstriction because the damaged blood vessels, or when there is an injury, the vessels get constricted, so there is damaged vessels. And at the same time, because the primary hemostasis, the first tissue come is platelet aggregations, which causes stops the bleeding. Okay, so when the stops bleeding, there coagulation takes place, and the fibrin deposit then comes, Then secondary hemostasis, that is clot and platelets are and fibrils are deposited. So hemostasis is vasoconstrictions, then defense mechanism or primary hemostasis by platelet aggregations, then secondary hemostasis by fibrin plus platelet depositions, that is hemostasis. So these are all the process of healing starts, okay? Then because of inflammations, once that environmental, there is a hemostasis is maintained, then the inflammation takes place. When there inflammation takes place, there are a lot of defensive mechanism takes place that starts with vasodilatations. When there is vasodilation, there are a lot of blood flows goes on. So there will be always inflow of what you call the defense tissue like phagocytosis or neutrophils. They all come into the site of the injury. So there is a process of phagocytosis that they engulf the dead or non-viable tissue and remove and go into the circulations, even the necrotic tissue or the bacteria. So this process of inflammatory process that starts immediately after injury with hemostasis and inflammations. Okay. Then the second stage is proliferation. Once the inflammation takes place and it goes on continuing, it goes on continuing for 2 to 5 days. So, but in between, on the second day or earlier to the 3 weeks, the proliferative stage takes place. What is proliferative stage? Is first granulations. What is granulations? Is a fibroblast embedded with the capillary. Okay, the capillary is there and the fibroblast surrounds there, and they are known as granulations. So the starting healing starts from the second day onwards. Okay, to the 3 weeks. So this fibroblast with the blood vessels as a bed of collagen to fill the defect. So this collagen are known as type 3 collagens. They start depositing along with that fibroblast and new blood vessels, which is known as granulation first. Then apart from that, this granulation has developed. So there will be new vessels, angiogenesis develops. So new vessel comes. So the nutritions, oxygens, and all the defense mechanism, they start aggregating or collecting in the site of injury. Then when there is fibrosis, so the wound starts narrowing by itself. If you see big wound, by 2 to 3 weeks, they start becoming narrow, very narrow, because there is always gland tissue and there is a fibroblast coming out and they contract. So wound edges pulled together to reduce the defect. So it became narrow, it's contracted. Now, on top of the granular tissue and narrowing of this, usually the epithelial cells migrate across the new tissue to form a barrier between the wound and the environment. So this gap is filled by the epithelial cells. Okay, so the epithelial on the top of the granular tissue, from below the granular tissue comes, from side the epithelial comes, and the gap of the wound is closed. Okay, so that is a normal process of proliferation. Once this proliferation takes place, then the remodeling phase, which starts from 3rd week to 2 years, meaning that a wound will be declared well healed after 2 years only. Okay, when you see that wound is healed within 3 weeks very well, it looks very strong enough, but a true healing, a real healing, and having all the properties or nature of that tissue that is replaced will take at least 2 years. Till 2 years, they are known as non-healing wounds. But they look healing, they are strong enough. They no infection, no any abnormal things. They look normal. But in real wise, pathologically, histopathologically, if you see, it takes 2 years to heal the wound. Now this collagen, which is increased, and they start enforcing them, they are strengthening them and to increase the tensile of the wound. So there will be the quality of the wound, the quality of the tissue, their function is maintained or retained once they get healed very well. So strength increases and become maximum, but not as strong as original tissue. Mind it, it's very important. You see, it looks very strong. The scars are very thick. Okay, the look as if they are very strong, but they are not equally strong as the normal tissue it would have before. So only 80% of the strength of the old tissue is regained. 20% you can't regain whatever time you wait for that. So this remodeling is that the tissue in the different layer, they join together. The tissue of one layer to then doesn't join to another layer. The very peculiarity of nature of our body is that they will find their the similar tissue across and they join together. They can't crisscross the tissues or cells in different layer. Otherwise, it will not heal. So that's known as remodeling. So same type of tissue, same type of cells, they join together and they strengthen and they get strong till 2 years. So these three phases is a basic thing you should keep it in mind, is what you call the inflammatory phase, the proliferative phase, and the remodeling phase. So this is how it basically the wound heals. Okay. Now there are a lot of wounds which easily heals by itself. There is no need, you don't have to do anything. They heal by themselves. So these are probably is a clean wounds or inside wound by surgical procedures, and they have got good oppositions. You have to bring them very close. If they're wide enough, apart enough, then you have to suture them and bring close enough. So if they don't have much of things, they will easily heal up. That is known as first intention or primary union. You don't do anything. So the incision causes only focal disruption of epithelial basement membrane, continuity, and death of relatively few epithelial and connective tissue. There is not much of damage of the tissue at all. So that's why they heal by itself. There is no any foreign body, there is no infections, there is no any debridement of the damage to the tissue there, then they heal very well. So as a result, the epithelium regenerates and preserves over the fibrosis. So there is a real tissue, there is less fibrosis because of they are very close, there is no foreign body reaction. Okay, so that is known as healing by first intention of primary union. So wound healing, they have got what we call the nature of healing by first intention or secondary intention or tertiary intention. Okay, so if you take skin as a example, all three type of intentions of healing will be there. In deeper structure also, mostly they heal by first intention, because the deeper structure we try to have a minimum damage to the tissue, we have try to have minimum bacterial infections, we try to have minimum followed reactions. So they always usually heal by primary intention or primary union. Whereas the superficial tissue, usually skin, they used to have either first or secondary or tertiary intention of healing of instance. That's why it's very important to understand that the deeper tissue, we must try to get it healed or get closed by first intention. Okay. Now, what is the first intention? That's a sequence of events that takes place. If you see this wound, there's a narrow incision space, and they're rapidly filled up with fibrin and cord blood. You can see the fibrin and cord blood, they start as having filling in this. These are layer of tissue. This is skin, this is epidermis, and this is dermis, or these separate tissues. So you can see that this gap is always filled by clot and fibrins, and this is what happens. And they get dehydrated in the surface, and there is always from a scab that you will see in a wound. There is a black color, hard, tough, non-sensitive scar tissue that covers this gap. Okay, so that is the healing process started. Now, what happens within 24 hours? You see, there is a movement of epithelial cells across the wound. You can see that the epithelial cells start moving. Okay, now the healing process takes place. Okay, so there is a thin layer of single layer of epithelial layer, and there is what the inflammatory process starts. See, there is a mitotic activities. The mitotic activities of the cells here, and the epithelial starts growing here. So all these the macrophages, and all they are coming in this area and engulfing the foreign bodies, okay, and proliferative cells that, and there is always a fibroblastic activities that takes place in this epithelial layer. So the first deeper layer starts healing itself, and the epithelial cells at that place, you see the glandular tissue coming up from below. Now, when this happens, you see, this granule tissue, so this granule tissue are healed by the epithelialization of tissue from the top layer. And what is left, the scab, they are not very stable scars now, it's still some wound, but very thin layer of epithelializations and the fibrous tissue below. But this scab is there. So you have to remove this scab. Once this gets strengthened and very strong enough, this scab will just come out by itself. You don't have to do anything. Okay. So these scab are dry and black. This is clot, and there is always a epithelial covering, complete covering, and there's all the fibrous tissue edges, and 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 there's a lot of vascularization. There's all a lot of vascularization coming up, but still these wounds are not healthy or strong enough. They might break anytime. That's within the 2 weeks they start having good healing process. At the end of the first month, you can see all of the tissue they had remodeled, and they have taken this same pattern of tissue that they used to have in before the injury. So there's a whole thick layer they join together to the same type of cells across and even the epithelium. Okay, so scar comprises cellular connective tissue divided of inflated covered by intact epidermis. Now you see they know what you call neovascularizations or nothing, macrophages or debris. Okay, and but in these places, there is always a permanent loss of the skin appendage. Like no hairs, there is no sebaceous, there is no what you call glands which would exchange the temperature. So it will be completely different tissue, like skin, but having no appendages. Okay, but the tensile strength will be more, increases, but not as normal as it was before. So 80% of tensile strength only they retain in these cases. Okay, that's the thing they will understand. What is the second intention? So these usually occurs in those wound where there is infected, there is big loss, big gap, they don't come close. Okay, there is necrosis, and the margins of wound is irregular. Okay, so in those cases, the healing process is different as compared to that inside tidy wound. So because of that necrosis tissue or dead tissue or loss of tissue, they can't completely develop or originate like the primary intentions. Okay, they can't come easily, so we need to help them to get it healed properly. So the complete repair is a difficult one. So the glandular tissue consists of, in this case, the fibroblasts, macrophages, neutrophils, and the new blood vessels, as in the primary intention. Okay. So earlier what happened, it is a quite big gap. You can see that cavity filled with blood and fibrin clot. There is acute inflammations, commence in junction of living tissue and dead tissue. You see, these are all living because of acute inflammation. There is a new vascularizations and there is dead tissue. So there is always a reaction in between these tissue. Okay, that's the difference between that, and there's a big gap. You see. And later on, what happens after a few days, the scab is there, they dry off. This is dry off, this is a big wound, okay? And they don't contract easily wounds because they're quite wide enough, it's quite wide enough, so they can't heal by itself. Okay. So There is a myofibroblast at ages, and there is a lot of mitotic activity in epithelium. Okay, and a single sheet of epithelium that comes across this what we call the wound. Okay, if you have joined itself, that means because they can't join, the epithelial cell they can't join. So this gap is filled up by the granulation tissue. See, these are all new vessels with fibroblast, and these are new vascularizations. So this is known as granule tissue. So this gap is filled by granule tissue now. You see, they will grow up and come up, and from the side they will come as epithelial cell and they join. If the wound is bigger than 4 centimeter, okay, because the maximum capacity of wound healing is 1 centimeter from each side. So from each side means 1 centimeter from the left, 1 centimeter from the right, 1 centimeter from the top, 1 centimeter below. So almost 1 centimeter each means 2 centimeter only can be filled up wound gap. If you want to make it wound heal by itself, you have to bring it close less than 2 centimeter, then only they heal by itself. Otherwise, they won't heal. So in those cases, what happens? This granular tissue, this granular tissue means capillaries and neutrophils and fibroblasts, they grow up, and as much as possible, the epithelial tissue, they will try to cover that granular tissue. Sometimes, if they can't cover the granular tissue and the wound, then you have to do a skin graft and put a skin graft over there to make the wound heal. So this is what happens when the secondary intention healing. Okay. So the same thing, scap sets. There is what you capillary loops. That's a granulation tissue, epithelial proliferation, as you see, and loose curved tissue formed by the fibroblast. So these all in the first week. And second week, you can see that there is capillaries, there is fewer cells, epithelial covering on the top, and the collagen and transfer they arrange, they find their own tissue across the wound. Same thing I have told you. Now you see what happens when secondary union differs from primary union in several respects. Okay, what is the difference? Inflammatory reaction is more intense. Okay, and larger amount of granule tissue is formation in secondary intentions. The larger is scar, and the wound contraction is there is a big wound contraction in the area of what we call the bigger wound, or when there is secondary intentions healing. So inflammatory reaction will be high. There is a big amount of granular tissue. There is big scar, and there might be contraction of the wound will be very high. So when you have a big loss of wound or tissue, you will have a big contraction. So that's what happens in the burn cases. Okay, that's what happens in difference between primary and secondary union system. Tertiary is that you can't close by itself. There is not much of healing process, so you left open the wound. Then later on, you do different devices, different procedures to make the wound heal, either by suturing or by stage-wise releasing incision and try to close it, or you do skin grafting. And there are different types of skin grafting, superficial skin grafting, or deep, or you can take the dermis, you can take the muscles, you can take even vessels. So there are different types of skin grafting to heal this wound that's in a tertiary intention. You don't heal by itself. You have to need to some plastic surgery. Okay. Now the strength of wound. Actually, why you put the suture for a week or 10 days? Because within a week, only 10% of wound they will have strength. 10% strength. Okay, within a week. So, but the strength that it scars increases, and the tissue becomes strong within 2 months. But once they completely heal, after 2 years, even the strength comes not more than 70 to 80%, not 100%. So that's why scar tissue is never as strong as the original tissue. That's what you have to understand. It might be a false impression you should have that a scar is 100% strong or is stronger than the normal tissue. No, only 70 to 80% gets scar. Okay. Now, what influences the wound healing? That's a very important part you should understand. Okay, either there could be systemic cause or local cause. Okay, so the systemic causes are the nutrition. Okay, any tissue, any cells to develop, you need two or three things very important. One is nutrition, second is oxygen. Okay, if you don't have proper oxygen or nutrition, they will not heal. So the first thing we're taking is the nutrition, most probably proteins is very important. These are the one who produce the glycogenolysis and act with oxygen immersion, they provide energy and heals the tissue. So protein deficiency, even vitamin C, microvitamins, zinc, magnesium, all these are very important. Copper, so they are all important to heal the wound. So, and if the deficiency of these nutrients, they inhibit the collagen synthesis, and there is no collagen synthesis, the wound will not be strong enough and very loose enough if they need collagen. That's very important. Zinc deficiency is a cofactor for type 2 collagenesis. So to develop a good collagen type 3, you need zinc. If the deficiency is there, then only it is not good. So metabolic stress like diabetes. So because in diabetes, there is chances of getting infection very high, and the tissue impairment is very high. That's why the susceptibility of the infection and impaired circulation, increased glucose might cause the wound healing delay. Immunostatus. If the immunity is less, like immunocompromised problems like malignancy or HIV or even coronaviruses, all these are immunocompromising status, then the wound heals very delay. That's what happens. Okay, that's systemic causes. So, if inadequate blood supply, I told you, there is inadequate blood supply, means there is carrying capacity, oxygen carrying capacity to the tissue or healing tissue is less. Then also there is a problem of healing, delay healing or retard healing. Inadequate blood supply because of atherosclerosis, vascular defect or trauma, whatever it is. So if you get no oxygen, that might cause it. The hormone like glucocorticoid inhibits collagen synthesis and decrease inflammations. So there is no healing of the wound. That's the systemic causes. Infections, you see, local cause infection. If there is bacteria or dead tissues, they are not cleaned properly, and there is a good media for the bacteria to grow. In those cases, also the wound doesn't heal. And the repeated injury and inflammation of the wound because of the wound in the mobility more mobile places or joint places where there is less blood supply. In those cases, we are touching the patients regularly, addressing every now and then. That might cause infection and there is retarded wound healing. And mechanical factor that most in early in healing, if you start walking or you don't give rest to the wound, they will not heal properly. Foreign material like sutures material and foreign bodies, like especially when there is a trauma, if you left the gauze pieces inside or foreign body like suture material, they didn't properly acclimatize with the tissue inside. And if it's a big wound, they are getting what we call as wound in the vascular area, is head or ear lobule or in the body, there are places where good vessels heals very fast. If there is damage or wound are in a less vascular areas, probably they are not heal locally. A small wound heals faster than larger, as because incision, that blunt trauma, contusion, they heal very late. Big wound needs big gap to be covered up. A small wound needs small gap to cover up. So, as I told you, 2 centimeter gap is easily they can come closer very fast, but it's more than 2 centimeter, then it takes long time to heal the wound. So, how do management? So, the management starts right from the time of wound that is happens, So, acute trauma and life support knowledge is very important to know about management wound. So bleeding, pain, movements, debridement, explorations, and irrigations, they all need to keep the wound as clean as much as possible, as early as possible. So that the more you clean it and do a aseptic or antiseptic dressings and immobilize the part of wound, it will cause less damage, what is known as secondary damage, less secondary damage than the non-well-care wound. So that's what the ATLS gives you a lot of ideas. You must know that. So there will be a class on ATLS also.
Excuse me, sorry.
Yes.
So what is debridement?
Debridement means you have to remove the dead tissue or not exactly only dead or impending dead tissue. Those tissue which are going to die, which not survive, they are not. You take out that not debridement tissue, like dark black tissues which are avascular. You can take it out. Sometimes even there is a tissue which die later on, so you have to debride regularly and take out the tissues regularly so that it becomes clean. Okay, that's debridement. So ATLS tell you how to take care of the wound, how to keep them fresh. In spite of there is a loss of tissue, you have to keep the wound fresh. That's what the wound management says. Okay, antibiotics or antiseptics or local antibiotics ointments has got no role against the debridement and cleaning regularly. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you should do every hourly or every 2 hourly. Just 8 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours. You just see according to the state of the wound. You have to do that. Sometimes there is a wounds. You don't know what is happening. It's like a cave. You have to explore them. You have to make them wide open and clean up. You see, that's the ATLS says. Okay. You have to see the tissue biopsy. As I tell you, debridement is dead tissue, but there must be tissue which is not dead at the time you see first, but they might die later on. So that's what you have to see the tissue viability. That's very important part because there is a compression. Big compression in tissue. The tissue they don't die at full pressure or not having good blood supply. So tissue viability is very important. And there might be damage to the vessels. If there are big vessels are there, you have to repair it so that there is a good circulation. Capillaries, you can't do that. But if the big vessels are damaged, you have to repair them. Nerves, very important. If there is no sensation, there is always no sensation, the tissue doesn't heal very fast. So you have to see whether nerve are injured or not. Any vital tissue are involved or not. Tendon, leave it there. Don't repair there and there. You can wait some time. If you extort enough, wound is clean, then you repair the tendon. Otherwise, leave it there, doesn't make difference. Only we just put a suture in both the end of the tendon so that it gives, when you second time, when you operate, you can see the suture material, non-absorbed suture material, and you can approximate tendon later on, okay? And if the big wound is there, if it's more than 2 centimeters, you always think of to cover by the skin. That's a basic principle of plastic surgery. Bigger wound, don't wait for the healing, all that. But it will heal by itself. It will not heal. So you have to cover by skin. That's under skin grafting. Okay. Now, what is scar? It's a maturation phase to scar formation within a year. Okay. Initially, it's pink, red, hard, and itchy because it's a good sign of new innervations. And collagen fibers get aligned along the straight line. That's you see in your body there are all lines. There are which in skin lines. The tissue, the skin lines are because of the deposition of collagen fibers. So if you just don't disturb that lines in our body, they will try to heal in that same line area. If you disturb the line, then it will be disturbed in the alignment. Then it's very difficult to get a good scar tissue. That's very important. And when this collagen matures, the scars might fade away and become a normal skin. If it is not bigger scar, they will fade away, become a normal skin. If it's a big scar, then. So there is a different, what we call topics in scar, when you have got a hypertrophic scar, whether the keloids, when you get a marginal ulcers, all this becomes in the skin problem in the healing process. So dense reduction of fibroblast and vessels, they become very thick scar. So pale scar is always pale, softer, flattened, and less itching. That is a normal scar. If they are white or red color, they are hard and always itching, means the scar is not mature. That means some problem might come up if you don't see the pale, softened, or lessened scar. Okay. So that will in a second time we'll be talking about the scar, and then we'll talk about this. Yeah, it's just in briefly, as I told you, the atrophic scar, this normal scar, the hypertrophic scar, and keloid. What is the difference? If the scar is pale, flat, stressed, blackish, epidermis thin, excision, and resuturing. If this type of scar is there, you can just superficially just take out and suture it and make a thin scar. But hypertrophy scar, there is excessive scar, doesn't exceed the boundary of the wound. Prolonged inflammatory phases, unavoidable, and growth stopped by 6 weeks. These scars, usually they stop by 6 weeks. Mind you, the 6 weeks is a very important time. If any scar, whatever the nature, is a thick or inflammatory or hard or irregular, not looking bad, if they stop within 6 weeks, they are not a hypertrophy scar. But this wound, if they don't stop and still going after 6 weeks, up to 6 months, then it becomes a keloid. Keloid is a benign condition, not a malignant condition, but there is an excessive scar extending beyond the boundary of the wound. The unknown, you don't know what is the cause, and there will be elevated level of growth factors, so they start growing and growing. They're deeper pigment, and they have a special area of the body like ear lobule or dorsal of hand or back. They start having this, and familial history also there. Those in family, they have the keloid scar more than those not familial. And the most important thing, they always look hyperemic. There is new vascularization goes on. The vessels, they don't close itself. They are having good supply. So the whole scar look a bit pinkish, and they are very itching in the edge of the scar. That's very important. And they progressive after even 6 months. So these are the scars, though we'll be talking later on. But these are the 3 types of scars. You have an atrophic scars or hypertrophic keloid scar. Okay, this is what happens. A keloids always have genetic relations. So you get in those patients who have got the family history of hypertrophy scar to keloid. See, this is what keloid looks like. See, they are quite big in size, irregular, and these are quite wide, fibrous tissue. And the edge, you see, this is hyperemic, and they're all itchy. Okay, that's in black people, they will find this keloids very common. So if you want to avoid the scar, so you have to correctly manage the wound. Okay, it shouldn't get infected. You should always, if there is big enough, you just do what you call is skin grafting, okay, and clean the wound, excision of scar. Okay, you can just go for laser destruction or misalignment suturing. If you suture in a misdirection, then you will develop scars. So you have to avoid that. As always, use very thin, non-reactive suture material, monofilament 60 thread proline. So they have no reaction in the skin, and they don't form any scar and reactions. And always try, if you can do, there is no chances of infection, the subcuticular suturing. So we'll talk on the suturing part. This all about this wound and healing. Probably this is not very